I'm here today at Stover Park to tell you about its namesake, Dutch Stover.
But last week, I was honored to sit down with someone who was actually friends with Dutch and his wife, Ruth. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to Harriet Langmus.
I'm so honored to be invited to talk about Dutch and Ruth. Ellie Waterston, our poet laureate of Oregon, wrote a poem about Bend, and the only two people's names that was in the poem were Dutch and Ruth. So she regarded them as the most important thing that happened to Bend.
Harriet came to Bend in 1956 to teach, but quickly got to know the man that many would come to call Mr. Bend.
Well, Dutch was Ohio State forestry major who came to Bend in 1914 to work in Mill A.
But the lumber mills couldn't hold on to Dutch. He moved on to banking and answered the call when Uncle Sam asked for volunteers.
And then World War I came and he joined the cavalry and served in Paris with his next door neighbor, monk Marvin Pierce, who was the father of Barbara Bush. They became lifelong friends, and in fact, Dutch was Barbara's godfather.
After the war, Dutch spent several years in Seattle, returning to Bend in 1923. And a year later, married the love of his life, Ruth Cushing, who also happens to be, little did I know, an alum of my alma mater.
And the two of them, for 80 years, did everything in their abilities to make Bend a beautiful place that we enjoy today. They couldn't do enough for everybody. They could have made a fortune for themselves, arriving when they did, but it was all for Bend.
And when Harriet says they couldn't do enough, she wasn't joking.
He started the water pageant, the athletic club, which is now the Boys and Girls Club, the Red Cross. He had the Capitol Theater, and he always let everybody in if it was a good movie he thought they should see.
Dutch eventually decided to take a swing at public service, but without taking a swing at his opponent across the aisle.
And that goodwill paid off.
And when he served in the legislature and was campaigning, he would always say, "My opponent is just a really nice guy." It's so different from how we run for office today. He was very honored when Governor Tom McCall came over to pitch the first shovel in the Dutch Stover Park.
Finally, in February of 1984, Dutch passed away at the age of 93 and was buried here at Pilot Butte Cemetery.
But his memory lives on in all that he did, and in Harriet, who's about to turn 93 herself. But in true little did I know fashion, there's something about Harriet that I also didn't know.
I'd heard you were on a game show.
Oh, yes.
Kelly was telling me something about that.
Oh, yes. I was on What's My Line about 54 years ago with my patchwork. Would you like to see the video?
Yeah.
Do you have time to see it?
Harriet Langmus. Where are you from?
Bend, Oregon.
Bend, Oregon. That's beautiful country.
That's right, in the early 70s, Harriet appeared on What's My Line, a popular game show at the time, showcasing her patchwork artistry that has been worn by first ladies, and her patterns were bought by McCall's.
Early American plaid skirt.
And on the way out of the interview, Harriet actually gifted us one of her doorstop chickens. His name is Chubby, and he now resides as the mascot at Central Oregon Daily News.
For Central Oregon Daily News, I'm Scott Elness.